Hello, everyone. Hi, my name is Lily Beth, and I have Robert with me. We are going to discuss a book report on chapters 6 and 7 on Roger Everett's book, Diffusion of Innovations. I will be discussing chapter 6, and Robert will be discussing chapter 7. Within the context of diffusion research, there are two key ideas that came up with the book reading. And the first one was that people have differences in innovativeness. And the second one is that analyzing innovation differences apparently brings forth information in predicting certain reactions of people towards innovation. These reactions can be modified by way in which an innovation is named, positioned, or how it is related to the existing beliefs and past experiences of potential adopters. Change agents and diffusion scholars must understand how potential adopters perceive new ideas, and such perceptions count in determining the nature of the diffusion process. And it shows how individual perceptions predict the rate of the adoption of innovation. Now, what is rate of adoption? Rogers defined this term as the relative speed which an innovation is adopted by members of a social system. It is measured as the number of individuals who adopted a new idea in a specified period. Chapter 6 suggested or described 5 attributes or characteristics of an innovation. Each of these perceived attributes is somewhat interrelated, however, the concepts are totally distinct. And how they came up with this selection of these attributes is based on previous writings and previous research. Now, the 5 attributes will be described as consecutively. And the first one, we'll talk about relative advantage. Rogers defined this as the degree to which an innovation is perceived as better than the idea it supersedes. The degree of relative advantage is often expressed as economic profitability. For example, if there is an innovation that has a lower initial cost in terms of an innovation with rely mostly on cost and productivity in the context of a business, that innovation will more than likely have a relative advantage for it to be adopted. Another example is, does this advantage on the innovation conveys social prestige, or does it have characteristics to where it can save time or effort, or if there's an immediate reward, so the likelihood of it getting adopted is higher. For example, in Rogers' book, offering incentives is considered as one diffusion strategy. Incentives increases the degree of relative advantage of a new idea and encourages behavioral change. However, it also has some ethical implications along with offering incentives. The second attribute is compatibility. Roger defined compatibility as the degree to which an innovation is perceived as consistent with the existing values, past experiences, and needs of potential adopters. For example, an innovation can be compatible or incompatible with sociocultural values and beliefs, previously introduced ideas, and the client needs for the innovation. A terminology that was introduced in the book was called technology clusters. This refers to when a change agent finds it useful to promote a cluster or a package of innovations to clients rather than treat each new idea separately to increase adaptability. Another example is naming an innovation. This is where a name is given to an innovation and the name often affects its perceived compatibility. Therefore, the rate of adoption is higher. The third um, attribute is complexity, which is actually the degree of to which an innovation is perceived as relatively difficult to understand and use. An example given in the book is how first adopters used the technology of home computers in the United States back in the 1980s. For those individuals who are technologically savvy, adopting home computers was not perceived as an innovation that is complex. So in other words, for those individuals with lower level technical expertise, the adoption of home computers was in fact a complex process that requires them to seek possibly help from friends or join some computer clubs to learn the technology because of the complexity of operating a home computer. In the end, home computers became more user-friendly, and the rate of adoption gradually rose about 50% among U.S. households by 2002, and doing a projection of this rate of adoption of home computers, I would imagine this is probably close to 80 to 90% at our current year. The fourth attribute is about trialability, which is referred by Roger as the degree to which an innovation may be experimented with on a limited basis. These new ideas can be tried on an installment plan and are generally adopted more rapidly than an innovation that are not divisible. So an example is a person that's trying out an innovation is one way for this individual to give meaning to this innovation and find out if it actually works under the person's own conditions. The fifth attribute is observability. This refers to the degree to which the results of an innovation are visible to others. Some ideas are easily observed and communicated to other people, whereas other innovations are difficult to observe or describe to others. An example in the book is the preventative approach of quote unquote safer sex, which we recommend to individuals to avoid contracting HIV. So the technology of introducing the safer sex preventative approach at one point was very ambiguous because there was a lot of misinterpretation as what as safer sex means. Is it abstinence? Is it sexual monogamy? Or is it more specific to using condoms? So as a result, this particular preventative innovation of safer sex had spread slowly and at a very relatively small percent among individuals at risk for HIV. In addition to the perceived attributes, Rogers also identified other variables that affects rate of adoption. And one of the variable is the type of innovation slash decision, and which means that the innovations requiring an individual optional innovation decision are generally adopted more rapidly than when an innovation is adopted by an organization. So, which means that more persons involved in making an innovation decision, the slower the rate of adoption. One way of speeding the rate of adoption is to attempt to alter the unit of decision so that fewer individuals are actually involved. The second variable is the nature of communication channels diffusing the innovation at various stages in the innovation decision process, meaning if interpersonal channels versus using mass media channels to create an awareness or a knowledge. And often it happens for late adopters to adopt slowly as far as um, choosing between communication channels, which one is better? Is it through interpersonal channels or is it through mass media? But for late adopters, the mass media either would not be as a rapid adoption as far as technology in communications. The third attribute is the nature of the social system. This refers to the degree to which the communication network structure is highly interconnected, and this also affects the rate of adoption. The fourth variable is the extent of the change agent's promotion efforts in diffusing the innovation. This relationship between the change agent's promotional efforts and diffusion of the innovation is apparently not direct or linear. So there is a greater payoff from a given amount of change agent activity that occurs at a certain stage in an innovation diffusion. The greatest response to change agent efforts occurs when the opinion leaders actually adopt, which usually occurs somewhere between about 3 to 16% adoption in most systems, according to Rogers. Now, there are four attributes of innovation that is perceived by members of a social system as attributes considered as positively related to its rate of adoption. And they are relative advantage, compatibility, trialability, and observability. There is one attribute, which is complexity, which is perceived by members of a social system as negatively related to its rate of adoption. Now, the question for the chapter is, according to Rogers, which of the five attributes of innovations presented is negatively related to its rate of adoption and why? To continue the discussion on chapter 6 and 7, let me introduce Robert Lawrence, and he will discuss more about innovativeness and adaptive categories.
Hello. Chapter 7, the innovativeness and the adopter categories. Prior to the 1960s, diffuse research used multiple adopter descriptions to define adopter categories. This process of identifying adopters didn't allow researchers the ability to compare accurate findings. The standardization process took place, creating a dominant method of categorization, which is based on the S-shaped curve of adoption through innovativeness. Rogers discusses this innovativeness as the time at which an individual, community, or society first uses or adopts an idea or a product. Innovativeness is the behavior of adopters in relation to change, therefore a continuous dependent variable in diffusion research. The S-shaped curve is formed from the cumulative number of adopters. So the S-shaped curve can be seen through the adopters' five categories: the innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and the laggards. The S-shaped curve starts out almost flat due to the number of few adopters or innovators. Then the curve accelerates vertically until at least half of the community or the system of individuals adopts the new idea. This curve starts to flatten again at the top when the number of adopters decreases. That is to say that there are very few left to actually adopt the idea. The innovativeness is divided into five adopter categories on the basis of the mean and the standard deviation, which are the characteristics of normal distribution of statistics. The five adopter categories Rogers discusses are ideal types. which are bases on abstractions from empirical investigations. Each idea category is exhaustive, mutually exclusive, and is actually a category that is derived from a single classification principle. The main attributes for the 5 adopted categories are innovators, which are more venturesome. They're set out to seek new ideas and to adopt those ideas a lot quicker. They are also the early adopters, which are more integrated within the system or within the community. They're usually the locals. They have the highest degree of opinions and the opinion leaders, and they are well respected and value their opinion by their neighbors, community. Then you have the early majority, which are deliberate. They provide the connection between the interpersonal networks. They find the positive and the negatives before committing to the new idea. They believe it, don't be first, but don't be the last to adopt this innovation. And it's usually a large portion of that community or that group, which is about 1/3. The late majority is a skeptical. They adopt after the average member adopts. They make up another large part of the group, of a third part. 1/3 of the group. They adopt when economically feasible, such as the cell phone back in the 1980s, when the cell phone was like $3,000 and no one really could afford it. But over the years, through peer pressure and through the fact that cell phones are a lot less, it became feasibly economical. Laggards are the traditionals. They're isolated from the rest of the categories, and we've always done it this way, or they believe that why change something that's not broken? Economic position of individuals could make laggards as well. So those that are lower socioeconomic class. Rogers goes on to discuss there's 26 generalizations of the 5 adopter categories. He places them under 3 headings: socioeconomic status, which identifies earlier adopters that are more literate, have more formal education, they are higher socioeconomic status, they're willing to move upward, they're striving for betterness in their status. They're usually wealthier, they usually have larger size units, which means farms, companies, etc. The inconsistency actually is the age. The research has indicated that there is no relating difference with innovativeness in relation to age, which I found this to be intriguing because younger people are usually the ones taking risks and are willing to adopt or adapt to change, especially in the technology of today. But in research, it has shown different, that there's no difference. Personal variables is another category, which are different to measure. So innovativeness has not had much research completed on this subject. But that being said, early adopters in this category are having more empathy, they're less dogmatic, they have a greater rationality for more intelligence towards science, toward change. They have a favorable attitude. They're able to cope with risks and uncertainty. They also have less fatalistic, or actually they have more ability to control their own fate or their own future. They have higher aspirations for education or status. The third category, communication barrier. Earlier adopters are more sociable, they're interconnected within their social system, as well as being more cosmopolite or interconnected outside of their system as well. They have more contact with the change agents, those that are introducing the innovation. They have greater access to mass media, more exposed to interpersonal communication channels. It's not what you do, it's who you know. They seek information. They have greater knowledge and a higher degree of opinion leadership. These independent variables are scored higher meaning a more positive positive attribute and related to their innovativeness. What I found most intriguing in this chapter is that the change agents, they seek to, in a strategy of finding the least resistance, which is usually the elite group within a system. Those are the more intelligent and wealthy personnel that are willing to adopt innovation or reject innovation. The elite is the intelligent, wealthy people who have resources for adopting change, but these are actually the people that don't need the innovation or the adoption of change. The less socioeconomic laggards are the ones who need the adoption of an innovation, but are less likely or not willing to adopt to that change because they don't see the same benefits in it. Roger describes that the internet as a tool that is closing that gap of this innovativeness and needs paradox of individuals within the society or community or within a system that is being studied. That being said, the question that I'm proposing is, even though knowing your own personality and behavior, describe your own innovativeness with the technological advances of the internet and the adoption of, say, online banking or online shopping. Remember to include which of the 5 adopted categories you find yourself and how you are able to make those changes using or adoptions of the online banking or online shopping. That concludes the discussion for Chapter 7. Thank you.